Here is a question for you. Where do we draw the line in nation self-defense when its very existence is at stake? Is any form of deadly force justified, or are there boundaries that should never be crossed? In 1942, Winston Churchill faced those very questions. The fate of not just Britain, but all of the Europe hung in balance. And Churchill, the same man who later created the plan to start Third World War against Soviet Union, wasn't the one for half measures. So a bold or even outrageous and crazy plan was born to unleash anthrax against the Nazis. Let me tell you the story of Operation Vegetarian. My name is Darek and welcome to the Sands of Time. The 1942 was a dark year for Britain. The Nazis swept across the Europe and Britain stood almost alone against the Axis power. The Blitz reduced much of London to rubble and the threat of invasion loomed large. The supplies were running low, the morale was shaky, and the Allies were fighting hard just to hold the line. The tide of war was uncertain, and survival of Britain and freedom of Europe was anything but guaranteed. In the midst of all this chaos, Churchill knew that conventional warfare might not be enough to win. The Nazis were ruthless, and the threat they posed was existential. So Churchill began to explore, let's say, more unconventional approach. Churchill was the man who understood the brutal realities of war. He knew that situation is dire, and if Nazis succeed, it would spell the end of freedom in Europe. So, when British scientists approached Churchill with a terrifying proposition to use anthrax against the Nazis, Churchill listened. The plan was codenamed Operation Vegetarian, and it was as ruthless as the enemy it sought to defeat. The idea was simple. Cakes made of linseed would be laced with anthrax spores, a deadly bacterium that could wipe out livestock and, by extension, starve the German population. These cakes would be dropped over German fields and infect the cattle that fed the Nazi war machine. Churchill wanted to starve the German war effort, but right now this channel is the one starving for likes and subscribers, and you are the one who can change it. So if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing to feed the YouTube algorithm and help the channel grow. Thanks in advance. Anthrax is a bacterium that, when inhaled or ingested, can cause a severe illness or death in both humans and animals. In 1942, a British government ordered a production of 5 million of those poisoned cakes. They were to be dropped by Royal Air Force, targeting agricultural heartland of Germany. The objective? To cause a famine that would cripple the Nazi war effort from within. A panic, chaos, humanitarian catastrophe, and mass deaths would be just an added bonus. But before any cakes could be dropped, the plan needed testing. And so, in chilling experiment, the anthrax spores were tested on Gruinard Island, off the coast of Scotland. The results were devastating. The island was so contaminated that it remained uninhabitable for decades. It wasn't until 1986, over 40 years later, when decontamination efforts made the island safe again. The power of the weapon was undeniable, and Churchill had it proof. Operation Vegetarian could work. But there was a catch, and a big one. While the plan might have crippled the Nazis, it could also have had catastrophic consequences. The use of anthrax wasn't just a military tactic, it was an act of mass destruction. Civilians, livestock, the entire ecosystems would have been wiped out. The cost was enormous, and Churchill, he knew that. In 1942, the stakes were extraordinarily high. Churchill faced the situation where potential benefits of Operation Vegetarian were weighted against a risk of unleashing catastrophe similar to the Spanish flu or Black Death. The spread of anthrax could have uncontrollable and devastating consequences, making the decision not just about defeating the enemy, but also about managing the risk of such a dangerous weapon. In the end, Operation Vegetarian never happened. As the war progressed, the tide began to turn in favor of the Allies. The Soviet Union was pushing Nazis back on the Eastern Front, and United States had entered the war, bringing its immense firepower and industrial capacities. The need for such a desperate measure disappeared as Allies began to gain the upper hand. Moreover, there were serious concerns about the uncontrollable nature of the biological warfare. What if the wind changed? What if the spores spread too far? The potential for disaster was just too great. Additionally, there was risk of retaliation. If Nazis and their allies responded with their own biological attacks, it would lead to global escalation in biological warfare. Given the risks, the plan was eventually shelved. But the story of Operation Vegetarian remains a reminder of the extreme measures Churchill was prepared to take to ensure his nation's survival. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history. Thanks for watching, and remember, the history isn't only about what happened, it's also about what could happen too.